Welcome to this episode of Pottawattamie County Roots presented by Hoy Kalnowski Funeral Home. I'm Todd Studer. Today, we are going to do a deep dive into the history of where we live. When people talk about the early days of Pottawattamie County, Iowa, they usually picture a few random pioneer families wandering out onto the prairie, and they think people just picked a random spot, built a log cabin, and hoped for the best. But if you look at the old maps and the land records from the 1840s, that is not what happened at all. Between 1846 and 1852, the settlement of our county was actually run like a giant, highly organized machine. It all started in June of 1846. A massive group of Mormon refugees arrived at the edge of the Missouri River. This was not a small group. We're talking about more than 10,000 people. There were thousands of wooden wagons and over 30,000 head of cattle and oxen, and they set up a massive base camp called the Grand Encampment. It stretched out south of the city basin down near where the Iowa School for the Deaf sits today. But very quickly, the leaders realized they had a huge problem. You cannot keep 10,000 people and 30,000 cows in one spot for very long. The cattle ate up all the grass in a matter of weeks. The wood for campfires, it started running out. If they all stayed huddled up by the river, they're going to starve or freeze when winter hit. So the Leadership Council came up with a massive plan. They decided to spread the people out across all of Pottawattamie County. And they didn't let families just wander off on their own. They sent specific groups to specific creek valleys and timber groves all over the map. In a short amount of time, they built about 80 small cooperative farming towns all over the county. They called these outer settlements branches or camps. By spreading everyone out, they saved the environment and turned the whole interior of our county into a giant food production network. The leaders mapped out the county by looking at the water. In the 1840s, you lived and died by your water source. So they tracked the main creeks and rivers running through the county. And they sent families down Mosquito Creek, down Keg Creek and Silver Creek and Pigeon Creek and the West Nishnabotna River. So let's look at the northern part of the county first. If you travel up around Underwood, Neola, and Minden today, you know that area has some deep hills and nice water channels. Back then, the leaders saw those trees and the water in Pigeon Creek and knew it was a perfect spot. They built a massive settlement up there called the Big Pigeon Branch. This was not a messy campground. It was a real community. The settlers built a central square and a big log schoolhouse. That schoolhouse was the heart of the neighborhood. It was used for school during the week, church on Sunday, and community meetings at night. They farmed the land together, sharing the heavy workload and building big fences around their crops to keep the deer and the stray cows out. Now, if you went south and east toward modern-day Macedonia and Oakland, the land changed. The trees thinned out, and it became wide-open prairie with incredibly deep, rich black dirt. The leaders looked at that and said, "This is where we grow the grain and feed the cattle." They sent families who had been farming for generations straight out to the area near Macedonia, where they had to cross the West Nishnabotna River. They moved the massive herds of cattle and sheep out to those eastern valleys to graze on the wide-open prairie grass. Every single region had an assigned job to do. When you have thousands of people living out on the open Iowa prairie, you're going to need some rules to survive. And the winters back then, they were brutal. Sub-zero temps, massive snowstorms. To stay alive, you needed two things: wood for heat and wood to build cabins. Because trees were scarce once you got past the river bluffs, the local leaders set up some incredibly strict rules about timber. So here is the factual truth from the early records. You were not allowed to just walk into a forest and cut down whatever you wanted. No single person could claim a forest and sell the wood for private profit. The leaders declared that all timber groves in the county were public property. They assigned a specific person in each area to be known as the timber master. If you lived out in the country between modern-day Council Bluffs and Underwood, you needed logs to fix your wagon or build a barn. You had to go see the timber master first. You had to ask for a formal permit. The timber master would walk out into the woods, look at the trees, and tell you exactly which ones you could cut down. They saved the strong oak and walnut trees for building houses and fixing wagons, and the softer willow and cottonwood trees were used for firewood and fences. If you got caught cutting down a tree without a permit, the local officials would take your tools away, they'd fine you, and then they'd shame you in front of the whole community. Sounds harsh, but it did keep the county from running out of wood. Growing a bunch of corn and wheat is great, but you can't eat raw grain. You need a mill to grind it into flour and cornmeal so you can make bread. And in the late 1840s, traveling all the way down to Missouri to use a mill was too expensive. It was also too dangerous. So the settlers decided to build their own industrial setup right here in Pottawattamie County. They looked for places where the water moved fast, and they found the perfect spots along Mosquito Creek, running down the line toward the area near modern-day Underwood. Building a water-powered mill back then was a massive job. It took a whole community working together. Teams of men from all the surrounding camps showed up with shovels and oxen, and they dug out deep ditches to route the water. They built heavy timber dams, hauled massive, heavy granite millstones across the prairie trails. Once those mills were up and running, they became the ultimate hotspots in the county. If you were a farmer living out near modern-day Minden, you'd load up your big wooden wagon with corn, spend 2 or 3 days traveling across the dirt trails to get to the mills. And during the fall harvest, these mills ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The whole valley smelled like wet dirt and fresh cornmeal. Farmers would have to camp out in line for a day or two waiting for their turn. While they waited, they sat around campfires, talked about their crops, traded gossip, and read the latest news. These rural mills proved that the outer communities did not need a big city to survive. They had everything they needed right in their own backyards. Primrose Retirement Community in Council Bluffs believes home should be a place of comfort, connection, and care. From personalized support to engaging daily activities, everything they do is designed to help residents live fully and confidently. At Primrose, that's their priority, to put the quality of their residents' care and daily needs at the top of their list each day and every day. It's not just about where you live, it's about how you live. Learn more about life at Primrose by going to primroseretirement.com and then contact Jamie Bush at Primrose and discover a place that truly puts people first. Your home for all natural health solutions in southwest Iowa is Bambi's Green Acres Natural Market. Serving the area since 1997, Bambi is located at 805 South Main Street in Council Bluffs and has a wide selection of vitamins, supplements, essential oils, herbal remedies, and a lot more. Staffed with over 37 years of experience, Bambi is putting health back in your hands. Explore your wellness options online at bambisgreenacres.com. Some people think these early rural settlements were just small, struggling camps that didn't really amount to much, but the official numbers from the United States government prove that is completely wrong. In the summer of 1850, the federal government sent census takers out to count the people all across Pottawattamie County, and the data they brought back, it's a little mind-blowing. Look, if you go back and check the official federal census or the state land deeds from 1850, you're going to quickly see that these are not just cozy campfire stories. The hard numbers are sitting right there in our county archives, and they paint an unbelievable picture. The 1850 census showed that exactly 7,828 people were living in Pottawattamie County. If you subtract the 5,000 people living right down in the main city basin, you're left with thousands of people living permanently out in the country. The census records show that these rural areas were booming. In the open areas, connecting Macedonia, Oakland, and Carson, families were living side by side on massive working farms. The government also kept track of the farming stats, and those numbers showed just how hard these rural settlers were working. In less than 4 years, they had broken through thousands of acres of tough, thick prairie sod. It took teams of up to 12 oxen pulling massive iron plows to slice through those deep grass roots. The census records show that in 1850, the county's rural farms produced over 100,000 bushels of corn in a single year. They also grew tons of wheat, oats, and potatoes. On top of that, they had thousands of milk cows, working oxen, and sheep grazing on the hills. These numbers prove that our rural communities were an absolute agricultural powerhouse before the 1850s even hit. So imagine trying to run a massive farming community when almost nobody had any actual cash. Today we use debit cards and phone apps, but in the early Iowa frontier, gold and silver coins were incredibly rare. So, how did the people in the outer settlements buy things? They set up a highly organized system based on bartering and trading labor. The old store ledgers and records from that era show that every single item had a fixed value. If you didn't have money, you used your crops or your time. For example, in 1849, a bushel of winter wheat was worth 75 cents in store credit. A bushel of corn was worth 25 cents. If you spent a full day working to clear brush off a country trail, you were credited a specific amount of corn or wheat. Farmers would load up their wagons with extra grain, haul it to a central cooperative storehouse, and trade it for things they couldn't make themselves. They traded corn for iron rods to make horseshoes, black powder for hunting, window glass for their cabins, and also medicine. The local managers had to watch the market like a hawk because prices changed based on the weather and the Missouri River. If a steamboat bringing supplies from St. Louis got stuck on a mud bank, the price of salt and iron in the rural areas would double overnight. The leaders had to make sure the outer camps always kept a big emergency supply of grain locked away so nobody would starve during a bad winter. Long before the county ever dumped gravel or paved a single road, the basic map of Pottawattamie County was created by the daily travel of these early settlers. They didn't have road signs, so they built trails that followed the natural layout of the land. They stayed on top of the high ridges and the hills to avoid the mud, and they looked for the safest, shallowest places to cross the wide creeks. The main trail entered the county from the east, right where Walnut and Avoca sit today. It cuts straight across the middle of the county, running through the open country toward modern-day Underwood. This was not a narrow little footpath. It was a massive, wide dirt highway. When one part of the trail got too muddy, the wagons would pull off to the side and create a path that was sometimes as wide as a football field. To connect the isolated outer camps to this main highway, the rural settlers built secondary trails. They built the north route straight through what is now Minden and Neola so the northern farmers could move around. Keeping these dirt roads open was a ton of work, so the leaders created a road tax that you had to pay with manual labor. Every able-bodied man between 18 and 45 who lived in an outer camp had to donate a certain number of days every year to road work. They would show up with axes, shovels, and teams of oxen to chop down brush, to smooth out steep creek banks, and build simple log bridges. The hard work of those rural crews created the exact routes we still use for our county roads today. The entire economy of our county changed overnight in the spring of 1849, and it happened because of something that took place thousands of miles away. Somebody found gold in California. Suddenly, tens of thousands of people from the East Coast packed up and rushed west. Their main trail ran right past our outer farming communities. This gold rush was an absolute jackpot for the rural camps. The gold seekers arrived in Iowa with wagons and pockets full of cash, but they were running dangerously low on food, on horse feed, and healthy animals. Because our outer communities had spent 3 years building up massive food surpluses and setting up blacksmith shops, they were ready to make a deal. Farms sitting along the trails near places like Underwood and Minden turned into fast-paced roadside markets. Local blacksmiths worked day and night, charging high prices and real gold coin to shoe horses and fix broken wagon wheels. That bushel of corn that used to be worth 25 cents in trade and suddenly being sold to a desperate traveler for $1 in gold. For the first time, the rural settlers were flooded with actual cash, and they used this new money to buy advanced farm machinery from the east, pay off their land debts, and upgrade their local communities. The California Gold Rush turned our rural county into a highly profitable trade empire. A fascinating piece of history that a lot of people don't know is that the actual legal creation of Pottawattamie County happened because of these outer settlers. When people first arrived in 1846, this whole area was just wild, unorganized territory. There was no official courts, no county sheriffs, no voting booths, and no land offices. They're basically living outside the system. By the winter of 1848, The rural population had grown so fast that they needed a real local government to protect their property and their rights. So they wrote up a formal petition, sent it to the Iowa State Legislature, asking to become an official county. The state approved it, and in the spring of 1848, Pottawattamie County was legally born. The very first elections were held right inside the log cabins of the outer camps. The settlers voted for 3 county commissioners, a sheriff, a recorder, and a treasurer. The early court records from 1848 to 1851 show that these first local officials ran a tight ship. They mapped out the first official voting districts across the county, set up local property taxes, and created a system to record land claims and cattle brands. This move allowed our earliest settlers to become official voting citizens of Iowa, shaping the politics of our state from the very beginning. So, to see just how advanced the rural interior of the county was, you have to look at a specific community called Carterville. This wasn't just a small group of houses out on the prairie. It grew into a major industrial and farming hub located up along Mosquito Creek, just northeast of where Underwood sits today. It was so well organized that it actually rivaled the main city basin. The old records show that Carterville was specifically built to use the water power from the creek to run a whole lineup of manufacturing shops. The settlement had a massive blacksmith shop, a wheelwright shop for building wagon wheels, and a large cooperative brickyard. That brickyard was a total game changer for the county. Before it was built, everyone lived in simple log cabins or sod houses, but with the brickyard up and running, the rural residents started building permanent, sturdy brick homes and strong foundations that could handle the harsh Iowa weather. The farm fields surrounding Carterville were huge. They didn't just grow food, they grew flax and hemp, which they used to make their own rope and linen clothes. Carterville proved that our outer communities did not need to import everything from the east. They could manufacture their own goods, complete within our own county borders. What if your healthcare provider came to you? Me to You is an Iowa-based in-home primary care practice, bringing personalized medical care directly to your home. Especially helpful for people who have difficulty getting out, Me to You serves patients of all ages, from children through end-of-life care, from wellness visits and chronic disease management to preventative care and advanced care planning. That means less time traveling, less time in waiting rooms, and more time where it matters most. Learn more at metouYou.care or call 641-843-8405. Service Master Restore by Schmader knows it can be hard to get things back to normal when you've suffered serious property damage due to flooding, fire, or smoke, and that can oftentimes lead to mold, and you may be left with all sorts of questions about how to get your home or business back to normal. It's easy. You give Cindy Schmader a call with Service Master Restore by Schmader. Her phone number, 402-339-9911. As more and more people kept arriving in the county every single week, the farming border kept pushing further and further north. Families started moving up into the open country near where Minden and Neola sit today. These northern settlers faced a tough challenge. They were miles away from the main trails, and they were living on wide open prairies with no protection from the freezing winter winds. To survive up there, the northern settlers had to rely on absolute teamwork. They broke the northern fields down into agricultural wards. Each ward was run by a committee of 3 experienced farmers who made sure the crops got planted and harvested on time. The biggest problem in the north was the grass. The native prairie sod was incredibly thick and heavy, and a standard plow just couldn't cut through it. So the neighbors pooled their resources, and they hooked up 12 or 14 oxen into one massive breaking plow to create a giant machine. This mega plow would go from farm to farm across Minden and Neola, breaking a few acres of ground for one family before moving on to the next. The diaries of these northern farmers describe a life of pure grit and cooperation. Nobody worked for themselves. They worked for the survival of the whole neighborhood. And that tradition of small-town teamwork, it's still a huge part of our northern communities today. The end of this incredible rural machine came out of nowhere, and it completely flipped the county upside down. In the late summer of 1851, a sudden, absolute order came down from the central headquarters in Salt Lake City. The high leadership commanded every single family living in western Iowa to pack up, sell everything, and move across the plains to Utah by the summer of 1852. What happened next, during the winter of 1851 and the spring of 1852, this is one of the craziest, fastest real estate stampedes in American history. Across our entire county, an entire functioning farming society went up for sale at the exact same time. In the open country surrounding Macedonia, Carson, and Oakland, hundreds of developed farms with planted fields, standing cabins, and miles of livestock fences were suddenly put on the market overnight. Because everyone was trying to sell their land at the same time, property values crashed. Non-Mormon buyers, land speculators, and new waves of immigrants from Europe recognized this as a chance of a lifetime. They didn't have to spend years chopping down trees or breaking tough prairie sod. They could walk into these established areas, buy a fully operational, money-making farm for pennies on the dollar. The old county deed books from 1852 show a massive explosion of land sales as thousands of acres changed hands in just a matter of weeks. The actual move out of the county in the spring and summer of 1852 was a masterpiece of planning. The people that were living in the outer camps, they didn't just panic and run. They organized themselves into highly disciplined wagon companies, running the operation like a clockwork military move. The old trail diaries and immigration logs show that about 10,000 people packed up their houses, rounded up their livestock, and rolled out of the county during the 1852 travel season. The country dirt roads running past modern-day Underwood, Minden, and Avoca were completely jammed for months. A steady line of white canvas-topped wagons stretched as far as the eye could see, making our rural county roads the busiest highways in North America that summer. The exit was so massive that by the time autumn arrived in 1852, the original rural society that had tamed the prairie was completely gone. The camps were empty, the schoolhouses were quiet, and the agricultural committees were dissolved. But even though the people left, the physical work of their hands stayed behind. The fields were cleared and planted. The fences were up. The mills on Mosquito Creek were ready to grind, and the trails were wide open. The rural machine was still there. It was just waiting for a new crew to take the wheel. The new wave of settlers who flooded into the county in late 1852 and 1853 did not walk into a wild, untamed wilderness. They stepped right into a pre-built agricultural empire. This massive head start is the exact reason why our towns grew so incredibly wealthy, so incredibly fast during the mid-1800s. New families from Germany, Denmark, Ireland, and the East Coast moved directly into the vacated farms. They didn't have to spend their first year struggling just to survive the winter. They walked out into the fields that were already cleared and plowed, and they harvested crops that they weren't the ones that planted. They walked up to the grist mills along the creeks, kept the water wheels turning, and ground their grain without missing a beat. The new leaders took over the exact same voting districts and county offices that had been set up during the 1848 elections. The dirt roads that had been cleared and maintained by the original road crews, they became the permanent public roads of the county. Those old paths are the exact reason why our modern gravel roads connecting Avoca, Walnut, Neola, and Oakland run where they do today. This incredible inheritance allowed our rural areas to skip the typical dangerous pioneer phase and instantly become a top-producing farm economy. So when you drive through the landscape of Pottawattamie County today, whether you're checking out the historic farmsteads around Walnut, driving through the valleys of Avoca, or looking at the hills of Neola, Minden, and Macedonia, you're driving through a living piece of history. The setup of our modern small towns and farming communities is not an accident. It is the direct inheritance of a master plan drawn up over 170 years ago. The layouts of our modern communities, the locations of our oldest gravel roads, and the roots of our deep farming heritage were decided by the hard work of a forgotten rural machine. It was a society built on pure teamwork, intense discipline, and a brilliant plan that successfully tamed 950 square miles of southwest Iowa dirt. The true story of our roots doesn't stop at the edge of Council Bluffs. It lives out in the creeks, the valleys, and the rich black soil that still feeds the world today. That's going to wrap this up. Thanks for watching this episode of Pottawattamie County Roots presented by Hoy Klonoski Funeral Home. Also, a big thank you to our hometown sponsors, including Brood Awakening in Avoca. Stop in and tell Bella that you heard about us right here on Pottawattamie County Roots. That wraps up today's show. Thank you so much for being a part of it. My name is Todd Studer, and I hope you have a great day.